Founded in 1950 and headquartered here in East Berlin, the Stasi were one of the most feared intelligence agencies of the Cold War. And to ensure the people's obedience and deference to communism, the Stasi spied on the East German population. Anyone even remotely suspected of opposing the regime was dealt with brutally. But such surveillance wasn't just carried out by Stasi agents. Key to the organization's power was a vast network of informants. These were ordinary citizens who, in support, or more likely in fear of the regime, denounced friends, colleagues, and family members to the secret police.
The Stasi is short for Staatssicherheit, state security, but they weren't security. They were a secret police. Secret police are what dictatorships have. They were feared, they were loathed, and they were the most powerful in the Eastern Bloc.
Life during the Cold War in East Germany was really dark. It was dangerous, and it was full of paranoia. Why? The Stasi. You knew that if you went to a family dinner. Statistically, there was someone there listening and recording everything you said. And as you're on the train, as you're walking through the park, you know there's spies everywhere, and they're gonna report on you. I mean, the whole environment is just one of, I'm being watched, and I need to make sure that I appear to be as normal as possible.
In the early years, the Stasi focused on arresting political opponents, filling half a dozen prisons with tens of thousands of prisoners. The organization continually expanded, both in number and power. And with the construction of the Berlin Wall in 1961, the population of East Germany essentially became prisoners of the state.
Life in East Berlin at the time of the Stasi was unbelievably repressive. A Nazi hunter even said it was more repressive than the Gestapo.
Once back at my hotel, I found out that it was a favorite haunt for the Stasi. It used to be called Hotel Stadt Berlin, reserved primarily for important guests of the state, who were all extensively bugged by hidden cameras and microphones in these rooms. Now, the Stasi used cameras identical to this one, coupled with hidden microphones, to watch and listen to what went on in rooms at this hotel. But they went even further than this. Guests would often receive a knock on the door from a prostitute organised by the Stasi itself. And if they were persuaded to partake in her services, then these actions would also be recorded on the film rolls, providing the Stasi with useful, incriminating blackmail material for their archives. Now, how this would work is that the operative would drill through the wall into the room next door, feed this long lens through, and then spy on whatever was going on in the room next door. And it wasn't just room-to-room surveillance that would happen here in this hotel. As you can see, this is an extraordinary vantage point looking out across East Berlin, and they would use their cameras, both still and film cameras, to monitor all of the activity that was going on outside.
The point was that they would have VIP guests there, particularly from the West. And essentially what they did is they spied on them. You know, you went in and your room was basically bugged and being filmed. And just to spice things up a bit, particularly if they wanted to compromise you, they'd make sure that you got into some kind of liaison with a prostitute who'd be arranged, and that would be filmed. So you'd then be, you know, they'd have something on you.
There were cameras installed, there were bugs, there were even little holes drilled in the walls so they could hear what these Western dignitaries and visitors were saying, and it was all part of their monumental intelligence gathering efforts. But you can still visit it today and imagine you're being sort of spied upon by these shadowy Stasi.
The Stasi were not just respected because they had to be. They were feared. I mean, you knew that if you were perceived as being somehow a dissident in one way or another, that you could be put in prison just because of something you said after you had a couple of beers. These people were watching your every move, and you knew that no one could be trusted. Not your boss at work, not your father, not your lover. It was that prevalent.
The Stasi's horrific treatment of suspected enemies of the state was not just restricted to its detention centres. Beyond the prison walls, they carried out something far more devious to silence their opponents, called Zersetzung, which literally translates as decomposition. Zersetzung was a process of psychological torture that aimed to isolate and paralyse what were thought to be subversive members of society. Now, this Stasi directive rather clinically describes what this meant, and I quote, "It is a systematic degradation of reputation, image and prestige, a systematic organisation of social and professional failures for demolishing the self-confidence of the individual, stimulation of doubts with respect to perspectives on the future, stimulation of mistrust or mutual suspicion among groups." They would even poison food, destroy relationships, or even break into people's houses and move things around when they weren't there. They quite literally drove enemies of the state insane.
There was something that they did called gaslighting, which was actually terrifying. You would go home one day, no sign of a break-in, neighbours hadn't heard anything, you'd be going about your business and think, wait a minute, there's something slightly different about my flat. Surely I didn't buy that brand of coffee. And then your alarm clock goes off at a different time. And gradually they up the oddness. Basically, you think you're becoming unhinged. Say you had one fish in your goldfish bowl, you go in one day and there's two fish. Well, that's impossible. So you really must be going mad. You know, this kind of thing.
They tried to kind of break men and women, make them feel like they were going mad, like they had nothing to live for. And this was something that could be denied, because it was actually very subtle in some instances, but also something that would get rid of the will to live from these people. And these people would be crushed, and they wouldn't really want to get up in the morning, let alone engage in subterfuge or treasonous activities. So they were crafty, very subtle, but arch psychological manipulators.